All right, good morning still, I think. Welcome to Routing Security and You. We have two distinguished presenters today, Hans Ottelman, Network Architect at Indiana University, and Nathaniel Mendoza, who's the manager of Texas Advanced Computing Center's Network Security and Operations Groups and Chief Information Security Officer. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jonah. Okay, so routing security and you, I actually had originally written this for a bunch of network engineer nerds. So I'll try to, just ask questions along the way if there's something that you may not understand or want it clarified. So anyways, as Jonah said, my name is Hans. I'm the network engineer at IU, and I dabble in some security stuff, and I brought along my CISO friend who dabbles in network engineering. So BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, it's what runs the internet, right? All networks connect, all external networks connect to each other via BGP, and the autonomous systems there are separate networks connecting to each other. So as you can see, there's a bunch out there, 74,000 different networks connecting to each other as of earlier this year. 1 million separate routes of IPv4, of course, and IPv6 is, getting there slowly, growing. And each one of these routers runs this BGP protocol and builds its own destination table to other networks. So they each build their own. It gets more interesting because BGP, like a lot of the protocols we use on the internet, is very old and creaky. It's been around since 1994. It was not built with security in mind at the beginning. And, without policy or configuration, it will believe whatever another network tells it. Because we're network engineers, we had to make it difficult, and it kind of is magic, right? For every single route to another computer, this BGP path selection is done to determine the best route. So it's like, 12-plus step process. Normally defaults to the shortest AS path, which we know now is not generally the best way to do that. And then, of course, the longest prefix match, which we'll talk about later, is also a big deal. So, looking at this, hijacking, leaking, spoofing, there's so many attacks going on in the world right now. MANRS, which we'll talk about in a little bit, reports that just alone in 2018 there were over 10,000 routing outages or attacks. 40% of them they believe were actual attacks. And these incidents, every one of them, because of the way BGP works, can scale globally in a matter of minutes. So first off, route or prefix hijacking. Basically, if a network, whether misconfiguration or an attack, originates a route that doesn't belong to it. Like I said, may not always be malicious. Hopefully it's caused by misconfiguration normally. And there's two general ways this happens. Via the shorter AS path, and you can kind of see, I hope you can see in the picture, how this would work. Because BGP by default will choose the shortest AS path or the shortest amount of networks to get to its destination. If someone in between these two networks advertises a shorter destination, it will override the legit announcement and traffic will just automatically flow to that AS. And then also with a routing prefix, so if you say, I have a more specific network, generally that will also draw traffic to you. Because the routing tables will choose the more specific prefix in that. And an example of these, back in 2008, YouTube and Pakistan Telecom had a bit of an issue. Before and after YouTube was announcing their /22, which is a fairly large block of IP addresses, and later, that day, on the 24th of February, as you can see, Pakistan announced a much smaller version, or a more specific set of those networks. Unfortunately, their upstream thought that was fine, propagated it out to the internet, and throughout the day, a a lot of networks started sending their traffic destined for YouTube to Pakistan Telecom. YouTube did kind of figure this out and started announcing more specific than the Pakistan people were announcing, but in some cases it still was not working as well as it could. And as you can see, I shouldn't just read from the slides, but then, eventually PCCW, their large upstream provider, realized what was happening, withdrew Pakistan's announcement, and stopped the hijack. There are a few other hijacking examples. Amazon had their DNS in 2018 hijacked, and Rostelcom, which we talk about a number of times, actually this one was fairly large in 2020, redirected quite a bit of cloud traffic from Google, AWS, Cloudflare, and others back to themselves, basically. So large swaths of the internet saw that as the best path back to them. So RPKI is a way to help fix this. So these large regional internet registries that kind of give out IP space. Now instead of just giving out IP space, you can work with them to actually get certificates that say, hey, I own this AS number, I own these prefixes. And then, once you get that set up, you can actually, your router can verify. You say, oh, hey, that person is the owner, he has a good certificate for it, and you can then accept that into your routing table and move on. It does allow you to reject on wrong AS, wrong prefix, or a more specific advertisement. Now, interestingly, you don't always have to reject. You could log as people are deploying RPKI. That you might not want to reject everything, and I think Nathaniel will talk about that in a few minutes. Interestingly enough, and we just saw in August, someone got around RPKI by injecting an AS path into the network that had a forged AS path where, both sides did have RPKI and certificates. However, being able to forge this AS path into the network, it kind of killed RPKI because it only looks at the destination and the source. It does not look at the full path. And so they were able actually for a few minutes to draw traffic away from Amazon with RPKI actually turned on. So looking at other kind of attacks, there are route leaks. Like it says, a route leak is the propagation of routing announcements beyond their intended scope. Try not to do this. This is kind of a little drawing I made to show this. If you're, say IU has two upstreams to say not level 3 anymore, Lumen and Time Warner. And I make a configuration error where all of the Time Warner traffic is attracted through my institution and back out to, say, Lumen. Your campus is not going to be pretty happy with that, right? You're going to basically take down your own network. So that's kind of a route leak example. And then in the real world, Rostelcom again actually did this maliciously, targeting some e-commerce sites. And no one knows what happened to that traffic, but it definitely did go through the Rostelcom network on its way to the destination. So this wasn't them keeping it. They continued the traffic on. However, it did flow through their network. So for route leaks, one way to fix that, we've got RFCs out there. There's a really good primer on the Noxian website that you can check out. And then, filtering these inbound, of course. I'm not going to go through the slide, of course. You can check it out for yourself. But also, using IRRs and strict filtering really is nice, although, Nathaniel will talk about this in a minute as well, where it can bite you. The idea there is that all the networks keep their prefixes in an IRR, a route registry, and then your network can programmatically go out and see what routes that network should be sending to you, and use scripts to verify that and either install or not install into your routing table. And then outbound, there's a few big, best operational practices. If you're multi-homed, only advertise what you originate. Don't advertise other people's stuff. Don't advertise your private space, and don't advertise your internal networks. So IP spoofing, that's big. You know, this is basically what DDoSes use in a lot of attacks. And interestingly enough, just last year, Microsoft put out a press release saying they were able to mitigate a 3.5 terabit per second 15-minute long DDoS using UDP reflection. And then IP spoofing, there's a number of ways to fix that, and there's actually a really nice best current practices website on that, and URPF is another way to fix that, but I would suggest going and reading that RFC and the best current operational practices there, BCP 38. And BGPsec, which, whereas I said before RPKI does not validate the entire path of the prefix, BGPsec is built to validate that entire path. We don't actually have this in the wild yet. I actually mentioned this to Carl the other day that I was going to talk about this, and he laughed at me, which was awesome, because we don't see this in the wild yet, right? But it's an interesting idea, and it would have prevented the Amazon attack that we saw just a few months ago. And then this is kind of old, you know, just make sure you have an MD5 password on your BGP session. This, in most cases, will only protect multi-hop BGP. However, it's just, you know, a good idea. So maybe this is all overwhelming and you're kind of worried about what to do next and how maybe you can fix this, and oh my goodness, there's so many attacks out there. There's this group that was created called MANRS, the Mutually Agreed Norms for Routing Security. And their goal is to help everyone with this stuff. So they have programs, training, tutorials, best practices, and a whole cadre of people that are willing to help you and walk through these things. And unfortunately, one of my panelists is retiring today and having his retirement party, so he wasn't able to be here and talk about MANRS. But definitely check out the website, and actually, we have these a little bit out of order here. So these are the things for network operators, assuming we're all network operators of some sort, institutions or campus, these are the things they help you do: filtering, anti-spoofing, coordination, global validation. And like I said, they're there to help. They have some really great best current operational practices. They have many wonderful tutorials. And then, Nathaniel, I'm going to pop back for a minute and let you talk about...
You can skip this one.
Internet route registry. There you go.
So we talked earlier about IRRs. So we were kind of what the genesis of this conversation was, what do we do and how does it affect us? We had a great example. So, you know, we belong to the University of Texas, and we belong to Learn and OTS, and we had a quick lesson in IRRs because, so these are what IRRs do, right? So they're controlled by the regionals, right? The ones we've seen forever. The US is ARIN, and then basically is to keep that database and publish that database. Next slide, please. So the problem is what happens when it goes wrong, right? So we issued a reboot during a firmware update, no big deal. We were all good to go. We got peering back up, no traffic flowed. So we called our upstream provider, which is OTS at this point, and they're like, looks great, see the peering. And we're like, why are bits not flowing? Like, bits are flowing to you, but not from the outside world. So it took a little working backwards, and it turns out ARIN had turned on strict checking the IR for the first time for us, and they just black holed us and nothing came up. And it took about 68 minutes of us manipulating the database to get it back up. So update your stuff is kind of my point. We were not aware their strict enforcing was going to be enhanced all of a sudden, or enforced all of a sudden, and a reboot caused everything to reconverge and kind of forced it. But IRs can go wrong, or whatever you're doing. So just be aware that these things happen, and it was something we thought we had a hardware issue for a long time. Which, you know, when you start network engineering stuff, you think it's always you broke it and you're working backwards what you did last. But it turned out it was a database we weren't even aware was being strictly adhered to, was strictly adhering us, and nothing went route to us. So, you know, just don't forget, whatever you pick, in our case we're using IRR because that's what my provider uses, it can go wrong, and sometimes it's not you.
Thanks. So the next thing I was going to talk about, and then I realized my co-chair is actually spending our next session talking about exactly this, so I will just mention it and say that, in addition to MANRS, there's also our International Routing Working Group that we've started with the GNAG and APAN. Warwick Mitchell from RNet, myself, and Brenna are all co-chairs, and I'll just kind of skip through this a little bit because she's going to speak to it. And these, quickly are engineering and policy goals that you will see. And please join us. Like I said, we're an international group of about 200 engineers right now, and we discuss everything from problems to best current practices. And this is just kind of for later, some interesting BGP stuff for nerds that I found that I really like. BGP Stream on Twitter is really great. They will, every week, basically tweet out, and I think Nathaniel is the one who showed me this, tweet out hijacks and route, spoofing and things like that, and just kind of, it's a list of badness that's going on the internet. And that's it. Unfortunately, like I said, I lost 2 of my panelists, but I have Nathaniel here to answer all kinds of questions.
Sure, and I have a point here. So the point going forward is the world is getting worse about these things. So us having trust, like we used to have for many years, is gone. So do something, protect yourselves, protect your network. Remember, it's not one thing that'll get you, it's multiple things that'll get you. But the more things you have, not fully defense in depth, but please do something, protect your routes. Please don't let them get hijacked or misused or, I used to think that from a security perspective, having your name in the news is the worst thing. There's much worse things, it turns out. So my point is, maintain good hygiene, protect yourself, and if you don't use one of these things, invest in something to make sure that you guys are protected. And whatever that looks like is great, but all this is best effort, but people will get you when they want to. We're seeing the world, the world is particularly tumultuous right now. That's leading to a lot of weirdness in the world, right? We've seen that the Russian hackers have kind of gone offline a little bit, but other hackers have come back up, right? So just remember, if you're an easy target, they're going to get you just because they can. There's no motivation besides that. So just please do something is my number one takeaway from this talk. And RKPI could be it, or if your local registry does IRR, do something. Anything is better than nothing. Any questions?
Hey guys, nice talk. Chris Cummings here, YesNet. I wanted to talk real quick, or ask real quick about monitoring for hijacks and stuff. We use Artemis ourselves, which is a pretty cool tool. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know if you had any suggestions for folks on like hijack monitoring or just BGP path monitoring in general, like open source, commercial, just kind of thoughts on that or values that might come from that.
That's the best one I know of.
Artemis.
It's a hard thing to do, right? And so those tools are a little late in coming up, but that's the best one I know about. They'll get there. I assume at some point this will just be like everything else, but right now I don't see anything better on the horizon, and hard problem to solve.
Cool. Thanks.
So just actually to sort of help answer that.
Thanks, Carl.
Yeah, no
We should have
problem.
had you up here.
There's another tool called BGP Alerter that can help with this that you can run, and apparently I just saw this today on Twitter. There's a packetviz.com, which is a BGP Alerter monitoring tool, so you can go in and register your AS, and it'll do the BGP Alerter stuff for you, and can send you emails, Slack, stuff like that. So.
And Artemis does have like a hosted offering now too, which is
Yeah.
kind of cool. I think that they'll run it all for you. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks,
that
Carl.
was BGP Alerter.
BGP Alerter.
Nice.
And you want it as a Docker container in AWS.
Right.
But again, this company now it looks like it's free too. You can go and register it, I'll just monitor for you and then
So Carl was saying he runs an AWS container and you can just register it and it should be good. But as always, you want to have these things externally of your network so it can look in and check, right?
Yep. Yeah. So again, our BGP Alerter runs in AWS and alerts us, and this new packetviz.com is running, running those for you.
Right. It's a service you can buy.
Yep. Service.
Nice. Thanks, Carl.
I learned something. Thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
Only time. Any other questions?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Should add BGP Alerter to that real quick. Well, thank you.
Appreciate your time.